Okay, now that we have our transform node architecture working pretty solidly, let's go ahead and shift our focus over to the shape node, and we'll begin with its requirements. So let's jump back over here to the whiteboard. Ooh, yeah, that's nice and scary. Let's go ahead and create a new sheet real quick. And we'll start out up here with requirements. So the requirements for the shape node. Class. All right, so what are the requirements for the shape node class? Well, let's start out by first looking at our fields. Well, the first thing is we're going to need to contain a static list containing all shape nodes. So let's go ahead and throw in a private static list holding shape nodes, and we'll call it shapes. Okay, now let's also have a transform node data member that will hold a reference to a transform node, so that basically we can link ourselves to the transform node that will provide the transformation information for us to appear in the world. So let's go ahead and create a private transform node. And we'll store it in transform node. Okay, now that's it for fields. Let's go ahead and set up a simple property. So our properties, well, we need to have access to that transform node, but it needs to be read-only. So let's go ahead and put in a public property called transform node. And of course, let me go ahead and correct my, let's see, does our eraser work? Yes. Let's go ahead and correct our casing real quick. There we go. So transform node, and once again, I'm just going to throw this as more of a comment over here. Let's set this up, Logan, as read only. We don't want anyone to go in here and relink this shape node to another transform node. Remember, in our original specifications for this application, a shape node is linked to a transform node, and that's its transform node for life. The end. Okay, so that's the property we need. Now, let's go ahead and take a look at what methods are going to be required for the shape node. So what do we have? Well, first of all, we're going to need to have a static constructor that is going to create our static shapes list. So let's go ahead and put that in. So our static shape node constructor. And once again, we'll just say creates shapes list. Simple enough. Now we're going to need a public constructor. So let's go ahead and set this up. And this public constructor needs to take in a string parameter. Now, what all is he going to do? Let's go ahead and just list some of these out because this is really important. He is going to need to create and link up with a new transform node. So create and links a new transform node.
Since the shape node has to have a transform node to exist in the scene, there's no reason to have it set up to where you have to create a shape node and then turn around and hook it up to a transform node. Instead, we can just have that handled automatically inside of the constructor.
Absolutely. Now, we've created the linking in one direction, but we've seen that we have to link in two directions back on our specifications earlier. So let's go ahead and set the new transform node let's abbreviate here. So transform node shape and shape to this shape.
So again, that's just finishing that two-way connection between the transform node and the shape node.
That's right, because remember, the transform node contains a shape node variable pointing to an associated shape node. So we need to go ahead and make sure that we set that. Because next thing that we're going to need to do is set this shape node's name so this shape node's name to the transform's name plus shape. And I'll explain. All right, think about this. When I call on the creation of a shape node, and let's say I'm going to call it ball. Well, we're going to keep our application very similar to Maya. The shape node itself is not named ball because when working in the scene, you grab an object and you move it around. Well, the shape node is really just a representation of data. It's where your data is at. It's the transform node that you grab and really manipulate. And of course, you see the shape move around the screen. So in Maya, when you create an object, the transform node is named that object, and the shape node that's associated with the transform node is generally called that object's name plus shape. So you would have ball as the transform node, and the shape would be ball shape 1. Something along those lines. So let's go ahead and make sure that when we create the transform node here, the transform node ends up being called the name that you passed in, and the shape node is the same as the transforms node plus having shape appended to the end. And with our validation working, it should be shape 1, shape 2, and the same for the name as well. So basically, all of our naming should hold up with the architecture we have in place. We should have no duplicated names. Everybody should be unique. So the final thing that we're going to need to do inside the public constructor is add this new shape node. To the shapes list. Obviously, that's important. The idea of the shapes list is to maintain a running list of all shapes in the scene. So, no better place to add it than right here in the public constructor after we've created it. So that's everything that we need to do, just loosely speaking, in the public constructor for the shape node. So the next thing we're going to need to do is add functionality that will allow us to show all the shapes in our scene. So we'll go ahead and set up a public static void show all. And what does it do? Shows all shapes. Simple enough. And one final guy that we need to add in there, and that is going to be the ability to remove a node. So let's go ahead and set this up. So a public static void remove node. And as you see, this is an instanced method, so we're not dealing with a particular instance of a shape node, so we're going to need to tell it what shape node we want to remove. So let's go ahead and pass that in. So send in a parameter called node that holds a reference to a shape node. And the idea is just basically remove the shape node from the shapes list. And once we've done that and we get rid of the transform node that's pointing to this, we end up losing all references, and the garbage collector comes in and collects it. So this is our requirements for the shape node class. Just a couple of fields, a property, and just a handful of methods just to get some basic functionality going. Anything you want to add to this, Logan?
Nothing comes to mind. Again, this is a lot more simplistic since this is just the data-containing node. The relationships held or the connections held within are very simple. A connection to a transform node, and then a connection from that transform node back to the shape. That's it. Just a simple two-way connection. That's
it. And then adding itself into a shapes list. And the ability to remove itself out of the list. And that's pretty much it. So with that, we'll go ahead and wrap this video up and move on to the next video where we will create the shape node class and get it all skeletoned in. So that's going to conclude this video. Thanks a lot.